Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowist, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. The organizations of tomorrow will rise or fall on how leaders design them today. With productivity challenges, culture gaps, and evolving workplace models, the question is, how can organizational design unlock both flexibility and resilience in the future of work? Joining us to share his perspective is Darren Murph, the Future of Work advisor, and an expert in organizational design, workplace strategy, and distributed work transformation. Darren, welcome to Tomorrowist.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I feel like we've been talking about this meaning the future of work, and are we going back to the office or remote for the better part of the last, 5 years, right? Work from home for many was thrust upon us as a society and as sort of a requisite to get through pandemic. And different organizations and industries have come back from that to, a whole, array of different solutions, from leaving it exactly where it is to everybody has to come back in the office, or we'll have different conversations. And so I'm really excited to chat with you today to give our audience some tactical solutions. I'm sure it is top of mind for many. Aside from the pandemic and related issues, we are now dealing with, different happenings and concerns around the country and around the world, as far as how does remote work or a distributed workforce play into a strategy. So let's get started at the top, and then we'll go down into a number of different verticals here. How has organizational design evolved over the past decade? Obviously, the pandemic right in the middle was a big shift. But talk to us, especially regarding flexibility and adaptability. Was the trend going that way before the pandemic? And how have most organizations rebounded or sort of evolved from that since the post-pandemic world?
Yeah, there's a line in there that I think is really important, which is, was the trend already heading there before the pandemic? And for my entire career, 20 years, I've worked across the spectrum of remote. And so I've been hybrid, in office, and remote well before there was a term for this, well before there were technologies like Slack and Teams. And so these teams have existed, but they were always a niche way of running a business. Then the pandemic happened, and then suddenly a niche became mainstream. And you saw a lot of organizations trying to figure this out. They were thrust into a new way of working, a new operational model without a choice and without a lot of time to prepare. And so in the 5 or so years since, you've seen this kind of shuffling of, are organizations going to continue to evolve and build new muscles and move toward a new frontier? Or are they going to retreat back to something that is more familiar or coherent? And we're in the messy middle of figuring out who is going to go which way. But I think there's a couple of things that we can focus on. The first is, in 2025 and beyond, every company at scale is a distributed company. And I think this is critical for leaders to understand. Even if you're in a company that is asking people to return to an office, or even if you're still figuring out your hybrid policy, even if you want to identify as something other than distributed, the reality is you are distributed. If you have multiple offices across the country or across the world, those offices are remote to each other. There's no getting around time zone issues. There's no getting around managing projects and decisions without everyone in one place all the time. And that's why I work with clients in trying to master these remote first principles, which are essential for officeless companies, but they boil down to just being great business principles that all businesses can benefit from. And the second one is talent mobility. I think that this was already shifting going into the pandemic, and it's going to look very different as we look ahead. That means that some people are sitting on the sidelines right now because full-time employment, the kind of conventional way of contributing to a company, doesn't really fit their lifestyle. And the organizations that are progressive enough to evolve that and say, hey, maybe we can bring you in from a skills-based approach and plug you into a team that's working on something specific, they're going to be the first to have access to all of this talent. So fractional work and portfolio work, this is an industry that is happening. A lot of the larger organizations are being slow to respond to it. But for startups and small caps, they're taking advantage of seeing these people and then plugging them in a more unorthodox way.
I think it's important to think about this, as you mentioned, not just as a real estate play or just as a teamwork or sort of alignment play. It really has to deal with organizational structure and then how executives think about talent play and their growth going forward, right? And then I think some of the things that are not pandemic or, otherwise related are generational preferences, right? There's geographical preferences on, somebody moved during the pandemic and maybe cannot move back for family reasons. Are you going to punish them for not being able to move back? There are reward structures that some organizations have implemented for if you come in, the coffee swipe stories are, all over the internet of, hey, I checked the box. Now I'm going to go home. We've also heard of, hey, man, I drove 2 hours to sit on a Zoom for 8 hours to only drive back. And so this is something that I think is larger at play, right? Because maybe that person can say, "Hey, I can sit on 8 hours of virtual meetings and not have to make that drive." And so, I think we've seen the ball go from the court of the employer to the employee and back and forth in terms of who has more of the say there. But for those responsible for dictating that culture, it really continues to lay in the court of on the side of the employers and the executives. And so for those talking about this and thinking about this as a top concern in 2025 and beyond, what are the top things that they should be considering, whether it is flexibility, talent play, or real estate, which is also a critical part of their balance sheet and their P&L to make sure that they are investing in all these things?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is to evaluate the mindset. Charlie Munger of Berkshire Hathaway has this phenomenal speech that he gave at a university many years ago on the psychological tendencies of people that he saw through the lens of economics. And one of them was the social proof tendency. And so what he would see in the markets is if something started moving in one direction, a lot of other investors would pile onto this without actually understanding the fundamentals. They would simply see someone else do it. They would believe that they must have some sort of inside edge. And so they would follow as quickly as possible. A lot of organizations are doing this instead of evaluating what are our values, what are our business fundamentals. Is this actually a great time to reevaluate how we're bringing talent in, how we're enabling them to do work, how we're enabling ourselves to have an edge and be more productive? A lot of them aren't doing that. They're simply following whatever they see, whatever is closest to that. And so I would say that the mindset shift is the biggest one. And if you want a tactical way to do that, I would say flip the script on performance management. A
Mm.
lot of organizations right now are looking at how can we make our people more efficient and more productive, as if the people are the core issue. But the people are the core enablers of your business actually functioning. And so I would say flip the script and ask them, how can you improve the performance of the systems in which the people are operating? So here's the analogy I would give. So imagine you're at a Formula One race and you put the most talented person on your team in the Formula One car, but you, the leader, are responsible for the condition of the car. You're responsible for how new are the tires. Are we sure that all the mirrors are there? Are we sure that all the buttons on the steering wheel are working? And are we sure that the radio between the driver and their crew chief is actually in good operational order? It doesn't matter who you put in the seat. If the condition of the vehicle is subpar, inevitably the competition will win. And so for leaders who are looking at how do we get better, look first at the systems and the infrastructure that your people are working in. And it goes back to my earlier point. Every team is distributed whether they want to acknowledge it or not. And the tools that you use and the skills that you're teaching around how to use those tools are incredibly important. If you're still just asking people to be in meetings all day, that's an archaic tool and an archaic way of doing things. It's time now to evolve that, look differently at that, and look at what technologies are out there and what learning platforms are out there to upskill your team to be able to interface more appropriately with your company.
And on that note, what are some actual proven strategies for integrating that flexibility? Because I think once you believe that that is the path or something that you want to implement, I think there are many suggestions, right? And every company seems to have a new solution for this and that. But what's worked in your conversations with your clients and you being the expert in this field?
The first is it has to matter. You look back at organizations maybe 10 or 15 years ago where security all of a sudden became important enough for it to matter. Having a chief information and security officer is a relatively new phenomenon, but now it's table stakes. And so companies quite simply invested in it. They chose for it to be important. Operational infrastructure deserves to be on the same pedestal as something like security. And for me, I have a framework that I use with clients: knowledge management, project management, self management, and performance management. And I start with knowledge and project management. If a new hire joins the company and it is incredibly difficult to find clarity around strategy or where things are or how to get things done, they're off to a bad start. And if this is scaled across your entire organization, you can quite quickly understand the inefficiencies that exist. So knowledge bases like Notion and having a team around managing the knowledge, treating your company knowledge with the same importance as security is really important. And the same on project management. We have tools now like Asana and ClickUp that allow entire projects and decisions to be housed in a proper tool with threaded and time-stamped conversations. So instead of losing things in the ether of a meeting, you look at something like a message board, Reddit, for example. Someone may have shared something 8 years ago, but because of the system that it's in, you can still find it and glean value from that.
We look at the spectrum of organizations, they're in various stages of transformation. Some have stayed, status quo from 5 years ago. Some have gone fully back. We look at the data on this, our internal SHRM data. Hybrid work is provided by 60% of employers today, down about 3 points from last year. So that's a trend. But I think we should also look at, what type of employers, right? If Amazon were to change their policy, that's a big one, obviously, even though they count as one. On the flip side, and on the same side of the coin, but on the flip side, flexible work policies are still seen as very important or extremely important by both employers and employees. For the companies that are still operating in this remote or hybrid model, what strategies can help them take their productivity and culture to that next level in the future of work while there's, still in various stages of transformation for them?
Yeah, I believe it was Dale Carnegie that said respect is the bedrock of motivation. And one of the easiest ways to show respect to a workforce is to honor their agency and autonomy. And that is a key principle of remote and hybrid work. And so for organizations that are investing in making that experience better, it's going to be reciprocated on the other side by employees who feel that value and they want to contribute to the company. But make no mistake, this is not easy. I think a lot of organizations that were thrust into remote thought this was just a policy issue. Like, oh, great, we can update a one pager. Now we allow remote work and we're done. This is a complete re-architecting of the operational model. This is a massive change, especially for organizations that have built their entire culture and all of their systems and all of their infrastructure and all of their workflows around a rigid 9 to 5 with people in an office. This is a tremendous amount of work. And so step one is acknowledging that this is an operational overhaul. And so instead of trying to band-aid this with a policy and then wondering why things are still inefficient, see it for what it is. This is essentially a product. Remote work becomes a product and your customer base is your employees. And so I would advise companies to put someone in charge of a team that is running this like a product. It's not going to change overnight, but even small changes like starting or ending your meetings 5 minutes early or 5 minutes before the hour so that people have time to be people between meetings. Things like doing an audit on what project management tools are out there. Could we move any of our recurring meetings into something that is more flexible, more asynchronous, and more codified? These are small steps that will show an organization that you're moving in a direction of evolution versus just retreating to what worked in the past.
I love that because I think, one of the things that a lot of our audience probably has questions on if they're not implementing this is what's important, right? Is it a simple matter of a one sheet or, hey, we're just going to move to virtual now, right? And would love your take on as somebody who's advocating for this on things that matter both to the employer and the employee when it comes to that agency and ultimately trust. What does the data say and what is your advice to clients on phone versus video calls. Pre-pandemic, phone meetings were great, and being on video is great for some things. You can't mandate cameras on. Some people can't do cameras on. There's technology issues. Give us your take on that.
Yeah, what I show clients as soon as we're in an engagement is this wonderful graphic developed by my friends at Workplaceless called the Placeless Taxonomy. And it's a bit of a hierarchy of needs, but with remote work. And so it's a triangle. And at the very top of it is connection, and at the very bottom of it is updates. And at the top of the pyramid, these are the things that are most difficult to achieve asynchronously. And at the bottom of the pyramid, things that are most easy to achieve asynchronously. Things like updates and sharing statuses. These things can easily be done with tools like Slack or Asana. But actually building social capital, building rapport, connecting and innovating with people, it's much more difficult to do that. And so you want to reserve more time for things like that. And what I often find is that most companies who say, we don't have any time for anything, we're in back-to-back meetings, when I actually look at how they're spending their time, most of their meeting time is at the bottom of the pyramid. And so what I advise is put in systems that can more easily automate these updates and get rid of these recurring update meetings. Now you have freed up time on the calendar to be used for something at the top of the pyramid. And so it's not an all-out war on sync or meetings. These have utility. It's looking at how you're spending your time and being more intentional, making sure that you're using the right tool for the right project.
I want to go on two different follow-ups there. One, how do you advise clients to break away from this new normal that we've all adopted, living life in 30-minute blocks? Because just on that topic, when you think about the pyramid of useful things and things we do just to fill the time, we live our life in 30 or 60-minute blocks, and we've accepted that as a norm. And if we get lucky, and I don't particularly like this phrase, but people give time back. But to be efficient, we can't live in, an 8-hour workday. It cannot just be 16-minute or 16 30-minute blocks. How do organizations and leaders move away from that and still maintain order, but efficiency and maintain that culture?
Well, what gets measured gets done, right? And so I would say build a metric around this that will actually incentivize and encourage change. I would also layer in this, the pain of staying the same must be greater than the pain of change. And so when you create a metric around, hey, if we're spending X amount of time in status update or recurring meetings, we now have a metric on that. We're now monitoring that, and we're going to encourage and push leaders towards getting rid of those and spending more of the time using meetings for something that is more appropriate. I've also seen one on the communication side, Slack, for example. Transparency is a major remote first principle. And ideally, you want most of your conversation happening in a tool like Teams or Slack in public or group channels so that the most amount of people can learn. But what ends up happening is most of the conversation gets relegated to direct messages, where at most 2 people are learning at a time, and you're building these silos, which is not good for the entire organization. So have a metric around that. Maybe 70% of the information that flows in Teams or Slack you want in public or group channels. And so you put that on your leaders and say, like, we're looking at your team and we're seeing how the metrics are looking. And so these are some relatively simple ways to put guardrails around what do you want to happen to encourage and incentivize behavior. Another thing is looking at cost. I believe it was Shopify a few years ago, put in a cost calculator. And so every time someone tried to schedule a meeting, if they added 10 people, it would then tally up the average salary of these 10 people and say, are you sure you want to book this 60 minutes? It's going to cost this much to the meeting. And I just want to point out something that I find a little bit absurd. Imagine if you joined a company and you could just go book as much travel as you wanted. Absolutely no checks, no balances. That's essentially what leaders do with meetings. You can go and book 100 meetings in your first day, and there's no checks and there's no balances. But make no mistake, that is an extremely expensive thing to do. It's not enough to just say, we're going to have a no meeting Friday. You actually have to put in tools to replace that. And so I work with clients on what tools do we need to put in place to manage our knowledge and manage projects so that we give people a good alternative to a meeting. Because if it is still the most efficient way for them to get things done, or it's the only thing that they know, most likely they're going to go back to that well.
I think it was a meme that I first saw, which was a something that you talked about with the meeting calculator, right? It was like, are you sure you want to add those three people, right? And they're like, their hourly cost is X, and you had to, in the meme, it was like you needed to submit for approval for that expense because now you're, tacking on hours. So I think a lot of people who've both, worked in a real life environment, people who want to advocate for that also realize that there's magic in sort of the off the cuff conversations, the walk to the water cooler or going to get coffee. How do you balance that when we are advocating for a work that is, not only just purely efficient, but one in which like we just talked about, measuring things about transparency and efficiency. Those things I think are some cultural things that people who now work remotely honestly miss sometimes, just the casual conversations or serendipitous things. How do you account for that? Or is there a way to build that back into the culture that is remote first?
Everything's a trade-off, right? And I think if you spend less time on meetings that don't need to be meetings, serendipitously, more time opens up for things like coffee chats and water cooler conversations. So even in an office, for example, if everyone is overburdened by work-related meetings, all of a sudden there's no one in the cafeteria. There's no one having water cooler conversations. This isn't a remote or office thing. This is a time management thing. And so I would ask leaders to make sure that you're empowering your teams to spend less time in meetings on things that don't need to be meetings, but then also provide communities and ways for people to connect. Early in the pandemic, a lot of leaders came to me and they said, look, we had a Zoom happy hour now that we have everyone at home, and everyone attended the first one and no one attended any of the follow-ons. What do we do about this? And so I developed this concept called a community impact outing. And it was a one-to-one replacement for these Zoom happy hours. And so if you're still in that mode, consider this. That sunk hour is gone. It's lost productivity for the organization. You've committed it as an investment in cultural building. So instead of jamming everyone into a Zoom room, send them out in their local community. Maybe ask them to wear a company swag and have them do something that's meaningful to them. Maybe they volunteer their hour at Habitat for Humanity or an orphanage or a local food bank. And then maybe they take a selfie of themselves with the company swag on. And then at the next team meeting or company all hands, share back a montage of what everyone did and where they went with that hour of their time. All of a sudden, this creates actual serendipity where people can start to connect the dots. Like, oh, wow, you went out and served at a local sports league? My child is in baseball as well. Let's connect after this call on that. And so it's a simple way. It's a sunk cost that you're already investing in. It's a simple way to build authentic connection instead of trying to manufacture connection.
For audience members who tune into every episode, we can't do an episode without talking about AI and its impact. And so we talked about the hierarchy of needs for organizations and meetings, and things at the bottom are now in the category of, it's no longer this could have been an email. It is now this could have been done by AI, right? Even taking meeting notes and redistributing them, finding, to-do lists and making sure that it's all done. And even in the software that you talked about, whether it's ClickUp or Asana or Notion, all that's being built in. What's the balance and trade-off there in terms of, that human connection where some of the chit chat happens in the update portion, and then over reliance or the impact of the over reliance on AI and other technology to automate the mundane or the tactical?
What I found is that business operates at the speed of trust, but people can't trust other people if the people can't trust the information that they're working with. And so for leaders, I would remind them that you can't just layer AI on top of your existing derelict infrastructure. You have to actually back up and build good infrastructure. Imagine if ChatGPT only had access to the last 5 years of internet infrastructure. It actually wouldn't be that useful. Or maybe if it only had access to 1985 to 1990 and nothing since then. Also not very useful. What makes it useful is if you have garbage in, garbage out, but the inverse is true. If you have gold in, you get gold out. And this is why I harp so much on knowledge management. If your organization were something that someone could order on Amazon and it showed up in a box and you emptied out the box, someone would look at it and say, well, how do I use this? How do I interface with this? Is there an operating manual that shows them how to do it? If not, they're flabbergasted. And this is what most people go through in onboarding. How do I find what I need to find without having 100 one-on-ones with people and just piecemealing it? Codifying this information and building a knowledge infrastructure that AI can then tap into and give intelligent answers based off of. That is the key to unlocking productivity in the future. And so if you're meeting with leaders and they're frustrated and they're saying, I can't find the ROI of AI, the most likely reason is they haven't put in the proper investment for the infrastructure so that AI actually has something meaty to tap into.
The trust factor is one of the reasons why a lot of companies are now mandating return to office or RTO. There's a couple big players in the financial industry as well as the tech industry that have decided over the last couple years, either you are coming back to a physical office or we're going to come up with this solution to have you do something else or not be with us at all. As somebody who CNBC has called the oracle of remote work and somebody who obviously advocates for this as the topic of our conversation goes, what are some of the risks and blind spots that leaders who advocate for mandated return to work are not seeing that can help them really take their organization to the next level?
Yeah, I really think this is the fax machine moment for organizational design. And you're seeing a lot of organizations double down on the fax machine, despite the fact that we've invented email, proverbially. I don't think that's going to be the right side of history for some of these organizations. Now, I will say, big caveat, a lot of these organizations that are going back have so much legacy infrastructure in place that even if they wanted to evolve into something dramatically different, it's going to be incredibly painstaking and incredibly expensive for them to do that. And so that's why I go back to that social proof tendency. Make sure that you're really evaluating, are they doing this because it's the best thing or because it's the only thing they can do? And I think then we as a collective tend to look at the mega cap companies, the companies that have enormous capitalization on the market and say, well, whatever they're doing is the best thing.
Mm.
But if you actually look at startups, small and mid cap, they're looking at real estate as a massive expense. And they're saying, if we can get smarter about the tools that we're using, if we can get better about the talent that we're bringing in, give them more agency and flexibility in their personal lives and give them better tools in order to drive work forward, we're going to win out. Because that real estate, that asking people to come in and commute, it is effectively a monetary drag over the long term. It's a bit of a tax that they're paying. And some companies might be big enough to pay that tax, and it's like couch cushion money. It doesn't really matter. But if things are leaner, it's tighter, and the smaller the team gets, you really start to pay attention to this. And your company needs to have a great reason to bring people together in a central office. Now, I say all of that and also say, getting people together with intention is incredibly important. And so some of the most progressive distributed organizations have entire teams within the people department that just manage offsites. They're there to curate the programming. They're there to curate the locations, make sure that the travel there is effortless. Think travel concierge and less people department. This is kind of the new face of bringing people together for the right reasons.
I think we've talked about, reasons why you're advocating for a remote first principle, or at least considering building it into it. Give us some concrete examples for maybe some of our audience members who, want to see how others have done it. And let's give them a few more tactical reasons and case studies to say, hey, here's some organizations who are a little bit hesitant or resistant to the idea and now are fully on board with this new mindset.
Yeah, I'll name a few. Dropbox is a great example. Dropbox was a very San Francisco heavy tech organization. They were very in office, had all of the perks, the bells and whistles, the foosball tables, all of those things that you may remember. And then the pandemic happened and they had a mindset shift and they said, we could actually downsize the real estate. And they actually intentionally did that by evolving their offices into what they now call studios. And so not only did they just cut floors out, they actually reimagined why people would want to come to these spaces, for how long, and to do what. And this is really at the heart of it. Intentionality is everything. Getting people together with intentionality still matters. But ask yourself, are we bringing people together just to sit on Zooms for 8 hours a day? That's not the most efficient use of the person's time, nor the company's dime. And so Dropbox is a great example. They're very transparent. I would encourage you to check out their website. They share a lot about what they've learned over the years. And Atlassian is another great example. This is a company that's actually headquartered in Australia. So they have huge time zone differences to deal with their teams in the US. And they also see their product suite as a bit of a laboratory for
Mm.
distributed work. And to no surprise, a lot of their clients are major organizations that are still grappling with, are we going to identify as an office or distributed? Yet they need to use these distributed tools. And that really is at the heart of my point. If you're using these tools anyway, you might as well enable the maximum amount of agility. To me, this comes down to de-risking your company or making it anti-fragile. And so for CFOs in the room, they want to hear, how are ways that we can de-risk our organization? Well, enabling work to be moved forward, regardless of whether people are in a central location, is a key way to do that.
I think I want to bring up one phrase that you used before as it relates to making change or believing in something, is that there is cost to not doing something as well. I think when we have conversations about transformation, it's always the cost of doing something. And we often wrongfully uh, tie inaction with no cost. But there is a cost. It might be a tangible cost, but there's ramifications there. Um, a few things that I want to talk to you about when it comes to the impact of remote first or some things that might be of concern, particularly to our younger employees, is they feel that that might impact their ability for proximity to leaders. And so there's an impact, or there's a perceived impact of a decrease in access, mentorship, sponsorship. And there are, stories of, hey, I used to run into somebody in the elevator. That's not happening anymore. Or an executive used to have office hours, and that doesn't happen anymore. How does an organization balance that with the need to engage, to instill trust, and to build a proper culture? And specifically, the senior leaders who are in those roles to not only come up with policy, but to create culture. What is the role for them to make sure that everybody feels supported in terms of mentorship, support, and access to leadership?
I think what's important for leaders to recognize here is that the ways that we've designed to accomplish something to date are not going to be the only ways that we'll accomplish them going forward. And I hear this often with mentorship, like, oh, if a new hire doesn't run into someone in a hallway in an office, their mentorship is stunted for the rest of their career. Maybe that was true 10 years ago, but technology and policy is already evolving to address that. I, for example, am a mentor on a platform called Mentor Cruise. This is an entirely virtual platform where incredibly talented individuals are one click away from all of those people in your organization that are hungry for mentorship. And so now I would argue that post-pandemic, they have more access to more mentorship than ever before, and it's available to them in a more flexible way. And so a lot of leaders have this kind of scarcity or fixed mindset that where we're at now is the finish line. We have to go back to something. I disagree with that. I think that technology is solving this. This is creating product market fit. Imagine a tool like Slack. If Slack were invented in the 1800s, it would have no product market fit. But because it was invented when it was, now it has become a de facto solution. And so there's going to be more of those as time goes on. And I would also say this is why getting together matters. You can still have those hallway conversations, but with much more intentionality if you have quarterly offsites, for example. And yes, that is an investment, but so is an investment in a massive office. The last thing I'll say here is that I actually would argue this shift is helping to dismantle proximity bias. People want visibility. It needs to be visibility of great work. So even in a virtual organization, you can put forth great work, great products that are going to ship and delight customers. Trust me, that is going to be in front of all of the executives that matter. And so I would say, especially for those who skew introverted, this is actually a wonderful opportunity for them to be more visible and more vocal using their work, not just their proximity to other people.
I think you bring up a good point, and frankly, I wish we had more time to dig into it. But it is the impact of both bias and privilege when it comes to proximity with geographical location, of who is closer to the office, perhaps from a home or real estate play. We saw this a lot during the pandemic, both in the professional space, but in the academic space, right? Um, Multi-generational homes with maybe not as great internet connections, those children were not as included or did not have the same opportunities as somebody whose families or situations allowed for everybody to have their own laptop and their own space. And so I think there's so many evolving conversations, and just as technology changes daily and new programs and new guidelines, and we did not even talk about the policies at the local, state, and national level that is impacting some of these things and that will continue to. And so I'm excited to have had this conversation there, and I know it will evolve. But one thing is, I don't think we're going back, right? We're not going back to the notion of everybody being stuck on the freeway at the same time and everybody being, going home at the same time. And this notion of a 9 to 5 still exists for many, but the percentage of those who are impacted by, or not impacted, but that, align or identify with that traditional lifestyle will continue to diminish. What is the one thing that our leader audiences can do today to ensure that organizations are more productive, adaptable, and fluid to prepare themselves for tomorrow?
I would say make it a priority in your business. A lot of organizations are treating and investing in organizational design and distributed work as if it's a perk, something like a gym or a wellness benefit. But it deserves the investment of a product with a product leader, a product team, checks and balances, surveys to make sure that there is product market fit and that you're evolving your operating model to make sure that your customers, your employees, are satisfied and productive. It's time to look at the systems that you're using. Are they still from 10 or 15 years ago? A lot has changed since then. And really, it's a mindset shift. It's galvanizing the team around, we're not going to work the way that we used to work. And although there will be effort involved in changing things, it's worth it because we're marching towards something that is more flexible for people, but also more efficient and productive for the organization.
Awesome. Darren Murph, thank you so much for your insights and your stories. We hope that the audience here has learned a lot. I certainly have, and we're convinced a little bit more than we were perhaps 40 minutes ago to make sure that we are prepared for the true future of work. Darren, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jerry.
That'll do it for this week's episode. See you next time on Tomorrowist. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcast. We also publish a weekly newsletter with in-depth articles and the latest SHRM research to help keep you in the know about the trend shaping the future of work. You can subscribe and find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/Tomorrowist. Thanks for listening. And remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have to be a futurist, be a Tomorrowist.
SHRM.